Hello everybody. Welcome back to Zdenek's English podcast. Here is another episode for you. And this time I'm talking to Cara. Hi, Cara. How are you today?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks.
Good to have you on the podcast. Cara, you are originally from Scotland.
Yep,
Yes. But you're not living in Scotland anymore. Where are
that's
you
right.
based?
I live in Besançon, which is a town in the east of France, pretty close to Switzerland.
Nice one. So you are a fellow English teacher.
Mm.
And from what I have seen, quite successful. Let me just tell you, everyone, how actually this happened, how this podcast happened. It was Cara who sent me an email, and I'm going to read that email out to you now. So it went like this. Hi, Zdenek. How are you? I'm getting in touch as I've always been interested in your podcast and how you've created it to improve your own English skills. I think I found out about you via Luke from Luke's English podcast, of course. I saw that you were thinking of ending the podcast, and I would love to be on it before you do. I've been on the podcasts of some of your guests, such as Luke, Martin, Rob, and Gabriel. Why are they all blokes? I teach through movies, and I run a movie club for English learners. So I go on podcasts to try to spread my movies are better together message, as well as to give tips on learning with movies, particularly improving your listening skills. If you would like to have a chat about these topics, just let me know. Best wishes, Cara. So, yes, I would like to have a chat with you about all that, Cara.
Well, there you go. Just read out the email. That's a top podcasting tip. Just don't do an introduction. Just read out an email.
I like it. I
That was a
like
good
that email.
idea.
It was cool. And I don't get that many people wanting to be on the podcast either. So I thought it was a unique moment for this podcast.
Oh,
and
right.
and
I'm so surprised. So, does that mean that you reach out to people and have to get them on,
I
or?
guess I guess so. But I've had some people who have asked me to be on the podcast, of course. But I just thought it was interesting that you also kind of noticed the fact that um, I was about to sort of be done with the podcast, which I'm still not
Mm.
sure about completely, but I have got these thoughts are on my mind, obviously, yeah, because of the stuff I do now as a teacher
Mm.
working online. We can talk about that later. But anyway, this is the introduction. So, Cara, you've been on Luke's English podcast. You've been on
Mm.
the podcast English with Rob podcast, right?
Yeah.
You've been on Gabriel's podcast
I
and
have.
Martin's Rock and Roll English podcast as
Yeah.
well. So you're a fantastic guest to be on this podcast as well.
I hope so. Oh, I don't want to disappoint anybody now. I don't know if those episodes were the best episodes of those podcasts. I'm sure they weren't, but yeah, I like going on podcasts. It's fun. It's fun to talk about what you do and to meet other
Absolutely,
teachers and podcasters, and yeah. So if people will
absolutely.
have me,
Yeah,
I'm
why not?
happy
I
with
mean,
that. Yeah.
I'm very happy to have you for all sorts of reasons. First of all, not that many people have noticed this that I was about to end my podcast, and secondly, obviously for what you do. Yeah, so I really like the idea. So let's talk about that today.
Mm,
That's kind of your speciality as a teacher. You focus on teaching listening skills mainly.
mm,
You do it through films, through movies.
mhm.
So how did that idea come about?
How did that happen? Well, it wasn't really sort of destined to be like that at first because, well, when I first thought about teaching online, I thought, well, I've worked a lot with like French people, so maybe I could do something for French speakers. I think a lot of teachers think like this.
Yeah,
They just kind of figure, well, I'll just do English teaching, but for the people whose language I speak, or I know them, I know their mistakes or whatever. I'm really glad I didn't I didn't pursue that too far because yeah, I don't really like it that much necessarily. So yeah, and after I started teaching teaching online and getting going with that, I was working with someone who, well, she kind of said she had come to me because she wanted to understand the books she was reading in English. But in fact, when you dug a bit deeper, her problem was actually more to do with listening, and then more specific. Well, a listening problem is ultimately a comprehension problem, isn't it? An understanding problem. So she's retired now, but she was a doctor, a dermatologist, and she used to go to a lot of conferences. So I think anybody who works with doctors ends up, having to prepare them for conferences. And the speaking part is one thing. Obviously, if you're presenting at the conference, that's one thing that you have to deal with. But in a way, that's through practice and getting some good slides together, and just really practicing your presentation. I think that is doable for most people. They can present. But then the worrying part is more like, oh God, then people are going to start asking questions. What if I don't understand them? And then there's all the kind of like, there's the breaks and all the kind of meeting people informally that happens at conferences. It feels weird to talk about conferences because probably not many people have been to a conference for ages. But if you can remember, like
online conferences, Zoom conferences.
Yeah. But I mean, well, all of the, especially when they were offline, they, there's a big element of just, hanging out and meeting people randomly. And, so those moments are kind of worrying if English is not your first language, because again, it's like, oh God, what if I don't understand?
So would you say it's maybe a little bit more unpredictable when it comes to your own presentation? You can prepare it, you can structure it, if you really want to do it well, you just take that time putting it all together well, right? But when it comes to these moments, when it comes to actually understanding what other people are saying, and what you're also kind of referring to, small talk, it is more challenging for people, and it's more daunting would be the right adjective to use. Daunting. It's like, oh God, what's going to happen now?
Presentation is bad enough, but like you say, you've got that, there is an element of control, and nobody's going to necessarily interrupt you. That's not usually what happens, is it? They save their questions to the end. So
yeah, that's right.
During the presentation, it's like, even when you start learning a language, like, I don't know, I'm sure you could give me like, okay, you speak Czech, which is apparently like the hardest language ever,
barely.
right?
Barely.
Like, you've forgotten it all now. You just speak English.
Well, 90% of time I speak English these days, so
okay, you might forget it. I know somebody Czech here, and she said like her Czech was starting to go a bit, not
rusty.
so great. Like, like her parents would say to her, like, speak properly, But if you gave me a Czech phrase book so I could go to Prague for a weekend, I'm sure I could learn like, or, ahoy for answering the phone in Czech. It's not going to get me very far, is it?
It's like a sailor's greeting in English, though.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's really funny. Like when I heard someone Czech on the phone, I was like, really? That's what you say? Okay.
Or Czech people sailors, or do they just like...
Yeah, they was with that.
Both.
Like, there's no sea anywhere near you.
Yes, we are a landlocked country. You're right.
Exactly. Yeah. But like, you could give me a Czech phrase book and I could learn like hello, goodbye.
Well, hello and goodbye is ahoy, so you're all right.
See how far ahead of the game I am. So like, in a way, sometimes speaking a foreign language, like if you're a beginner and you start learning some textbook stuff like that, like you're like, okay, I'm starting to know something. But then obviously when people start talking back to you, you're not going to understand them as a beginner. But even later, sometimes people have said to me, like, my speaking's pretty good, I feel quite confident about that. But actually, like, the worrying part is when people start speaking back to me, and then I'm like, oh my God, I don't understand them, especially if they're native speakers. And so it's totally normal actually to be in that situation where your speaking can actually be ahead of your listening. And in a way, it's not good, because if people are like, wow, this person's really fluent or a really competent speaker, they're just going to go, they're not really going to modify their language as much. Whereas if your English was a bit, less fluent, you were maybe searching for your words, they would probably like go slower when they speak. So it's kind of funny. You can actually end up, your speaking competence can actually be like a bit of a, hindrance for you when, if your listening isn't as good. So
do you find that, like, if you look at all English learners around the globe, do you find that this is common? Like in percent, if you were to express it in percentage, or
Gosh.
like this is interesting because I tend to meet a lot of people who have the opposite problem, whose listening and passive understanding and comprehension is
Is
pretty good.
ahead of their
And
speaking.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're, as you say, ahead of their speaking. But this is the opposite problem, which is quite unique. So how is this even happening? Like
How is it easy?
who do you think, like if we were to look at, perhaps, I don't know if we are allowed to do that, but certain nationalities, I don't think we are naming and shaming here. I think
Mm.
it's true, isn't it? Like certain nationalities struggle with certain things, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
who would
yeah.
you say, would uh, kind of fit in that category then?
Yeah, of having maybe sometimes speaking ahead of this. That's a really good question
Hmm.
because, yeah, I do think the other scenario is more common.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, certainly. Well, my student was French.
Okay.
The French people tend to be quite like negative about their English in general. So they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, we're really bad at it," and we were taught it badly. You know, there's a lot of like, it was badly taught at school, and
Yeah. I think
so.
it's the same with Czech people. They would say that
Mm,
exactly the same. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I wonder if some of that comes from like I've heard. Something weird that I've noticed is like if you go to Portugal, often people
Yeah.
have a good level of English and they even speak French, and I'm sure other languages. They're like, wow, Portuguese people really good at languages, good for them. And then you go to Brazil and you hear that, like, a lot of people struggle with English, and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense because, like, okay,
Same
I know.
language.
Well, same. Okay, Brazilian Portuguese and Portugal
Yeah.
Portuguese are different, but ultimately, yes, it's a
Yeah.
Romance language. It's the same basis. It's the same, sentence structure, grammar, whatever. Even if the pronunciation is a bit different, so you're kind of like, how can that possibly be the case? But I've heard that, like, in Brazil, people have maybe more of a perfectionistic attitude, like they do in French, to learning English. So that I can see how, like, you might feel comfortable then, like, just kind of listening and not wanting to express
Okay.
yourself. So I can see how there can, but it is normal to have for your speaking to be ahead of your
I would.
listening, rather, to be ahead of your speaking.
Yeah.
Most of the time, even when you're learning your first language as a kid, that's usually what happens.
That's it. And I think a lot of things kind of come into play, including
Mm.
your personality trait, whether you are an
Mm.
extroverted or introverted person. So
Yeah.
I would say your ideal client would be someone who is extroverted, actually,
Oh
because I
yeah,
think
yeah.
introverts don't, they listen a lot. They sort of
Are
more
better at
passive.
it.
Yeah, they are,
Mm.
they are good at it. Yes, and whereas extroverts, they tend to want to speak a lot and express themselves and kind of, put
Not
themselves in the
listen.
spotlight, so to speak. So
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I actually work with a lot of people who are Italian, not only, but I think that's
mm,
also more to do with like a lot of speakers of Romance languages in Europe, apart
yeah,
from the Portuguese, who seem to be the sort of exception. Yeah, the way it's taught in schools is still quite traditional, and even among younger people, it's maybe not as good as it could be. No offense if you're an Italian teacher of English. I think conditions for teachers of English in sort of high schools and middle schools are really not really
up
appropriate in a lot of yeah. It's,
up
it's
to
a
scratch.
hard yeah, it's a hard thing to teach, and often schools aren't very supportive. They think it's like maths or geography, like just cram a bunch of facts, like just learn all the
Yeah.
verb tables and then you know it, or something, which is obviously not how
Well, you may
language
learn it.
works.
You may learn it for the exam, and then you kind of pass the
Forget it
exam or the
all.
test. You do well in the test, but you forget it immediately because,
Hmm.
as you say, you just cram it. There is no like reason for learning it. There's no motivation. It's just all in order to pass the exam or to do well in the test.
Yeah,
So
it's a
it's
thing that's imposed on you, and
yeah, it's not.
yeah.
That's where you come in, I guess, with your idea. Let's get back to that. So,
Yeah,
you
let's
teach
mm.
English through movies.
Yeah, yeah, and so these days, I still focus quite a lot on the listening bit because, well, I mean, it is important for understanding movies, which are often hard to understand. I mean, sometimes even harder than just normal conversations. So, I mean, there is something about movie dialogue that makes it hard. I think not just in English, in other languages as well, but that also makes it a good place to train your listening, because then in real life, we hope it will be slightly less difficult and you'll have trained yourself with something harder. So that could be an advantage. So people want help with that, definitely. So I do, I kind of come at it from a perspective of like, everybody wants to watch movies without subtitles. That's a goal for a lot of people. And then that's obviously useful for real life, because there's loads of scenarios where you don't have subtitles, because when you talk to people, you don't have subtitles. And, so it's useful for these two kinds of, situations. You're going to improve your listening for talking to native speakers. As actually interacting with people. And I do work with a lot of people who they do genuinely need to talk to native speakers. There's a lot of English learners who'll never talk to an English speaker ever. So they don't need to worry about this. That's a surprisingly large group of people will never, probably never interact with a native speaker, and that's absolutely fine. They'll be speaking English with other people for who it's not a first language. So that's great.
Well, it's a thing as well, because it has a name. It's called English as a lingua franca. Yeah. So there are a lot of people these days who actually point out that, not point out, but they sort of wonder, like, what's the kind of English we should even be teaching as English teachers. Yeah. So perhaps teaching English. Teaching or having this slogan, speak English like a native or sound like a native, perhaps it's not the best approach. So it's all kind of, it's a point of contention, let's say. It's a sticking point.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, for me, I come at it from my perspective of, I've lived in France for 15 years now. So I know what it's like when you move to a new country and I could speak French when I arrived. It was fine, but I came with the intention of improving it, because I wanted to sound more idiomatic and natural. And for me, if you're going to live somewhere for a long time, I think it is good to sound close to natives, because it helps you get closer to people, and it can help you feel more integrated. I mean, it's not a guarantee that you will be integrated. But for me, in my experience living abroad, it's been really useful to do that. And I mean, there are obviously British people, or tends to be British people in France who, barely speak a word of French or don't speak it very well, and it made their life difficult with Brexit, because all of a sudden they had to take language exams to get French nationality. And for me, it wasn't even, I didn't actually have to do an exam, because I have a master's degree from French university. And so if you've studied in France, they consider that you can speak the language at any level of diploma. So it could be something more vocational, or, it doesn't matter. If you've studied in France, they consider you must be able to speak the language. Otherwise you could never have passed your exams. So, so just to come back to for like I said, I'm working with people who they either live in an English speaking country, or they travel a lot, or they're living in a third country. Do you see what I mean? I work with someone who lives in Switzerland. So if you're going to live in Switzerland, it's a multilingual place, and obviously English is important because it's so international. So you kind of have to speak Italian, French, German, and English. You have to, you have to be willing to be multilingual. Although, to be honest, when I worked in French-speaking Switzerland, I got the impression that a lot of the people who were Swiss and spoke French, they didn't really know how to speak German, for instance. But anyway, that's a whole other issue. But yeah, usually if you're going to live in Switzerland, you have to be multilingual. It's just the reality of the situation. Or I know people living in other countries like the Netherlands or Croatia, or they're often having to learn English plus the language of where they're living, and it can get quite kind of complicated. It's cool though. I mean, to live your life in all these languages, I think it's pretty awesome. So I just clarify that to I'm working with people who are very motivated because, like,
Mm,
they need English for their life. Really, it's
yep.
yeah. But that's really cool, and it's the same for me with languages. It's I like learning languages. I really like it a lot. And then, but it gets even more serious when you're like, okay, I'm going to go and live in the country. I'm going to, this is where you have to. It's not just like, oh, this is a fun hobby. It's like, okay, this is quite kind of serious now because I need this to be able to live my life and do all the things I need to do. So, yeah, it takes on like a new level of importance, I think. I've just wandered really far from your like original question or statement. I don't know if I remember what it
Yeah, I'm
was.
trying to. Well, you know what? It's like I like this when I just sort of talk to my guest and time flies. I mean,
Yeah,
ultimately we are here for English learners who just need to listen to some English. And if we go on of if we go off on a few tangents, I think it's not a big issue. But
yeah.
since we have you here, and you asked me in that email that you would like to promote your own project,
Yeah, that's true.
we might as
Yeah,
well find out more about it. So
yeah.
where can an important question: where can my listeners find you, Cara?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So they can go to leonisthing.com, which is my website, and or if you type that in the internet, you'll get my website and you'll get YouTube.
Yep.
That's the only places I am these days. 'Cause I quit social media.
I should
So
probably do the same, to be honest.
yeah, I think. Oh, I don't,
I'm getting very, very sick and tired of this, to be honest with you. So I might follow you soon.
yeah,
What?
I been quit Facebook 2 years ago. I deleted my account, and I believe I still have an account that's in hibernation. But I never, I don't have the login details. Like I don't know
Here we go.
how to get back in. Oh, that's fancy. I think I wanted to say before I was getting yes, we were trying to make this link between yeah, watching movies, understanding native speakers, teaching listening. I mean, like I do have material and products for learning how to understand fast talking native speakers better, and I do that through movies. And for me, that's kind of the foundation for then going on to what is the really exciting part, which is watching the movies, understanding them, and talking about them with other people.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what it's evolved into with the
So is
movie
that a
club.
course? Is that a course my listeners or anyone listening to this can actually enroll on?
Well, they can enroll in. I've got a course called Movies on the Run, which is,
Okay.
I would say, like, if you wanted to afterwards to come and do the movie club, that's a good course to do because it teaches you how to understand fast talking native speakers without subtitles, and obviously movies without subtitles. So that's a good way to start, to make it a bit easier for you to understand movies. But I don't like demand perfection with that either. So like my students have different strategies as well when we watch a movie every month. So some of them will like watch a dubbed version before they watch it in English.
Okay. But that would
Um,
be like for lower levels, right? Like, why would you watch?
not even. I have someone who's quite competent who does that just to like
So when you say dub version, you mean they would first watch it in their first
in their
language?
in their language. So the idea
Seriously?
there is, yeah, the idea I think is to be able to understand the plot very really thoroughly, and
Hmm.
then to be confident going into watching the English version that you're not missing anything due to like getting lost because you haven't understood some of the language. I think it's quite a good strategy. It's obviously more time consuming, but I
Yeah.
mean this is something to be aware of if you do want to learn with movies. You can't just kind of stick on the movie and imagine it's going to teach you everything. It doesn't work like that. So there's a lot of preparation that can go
But
into it,
uh,
whereas yeah.
wouldn't you say it depends on your level? Because to be honest, like if once you are at least B1, if once you are at least intermediate, like anyone who listens to this podcast,
Yeah,
in my opinion, doesn't need to watch the movie in their first language first. Obviously, it's your method.
yeah.
I would actually argue that it is not necessary to understand the plot in depth. And I think the bigger picture, or let's say the gist, is more important. And you could watch it twice. First, for just for the gist,
Yeah, and then the
and
second
then watch it,
time,
rewatch it, and
yeah.
just try to catch more or pick up more phrases, look
I,
at more details, and notice the nuances.
Yeah, I actually found it hard at B1 level in French to watch an entire movie, and I
Okay,
probably wouldn't have watched a dubbed version. That's not my method. That's like what one of my students does, and I let them do what they want basically
of course, yeah,
when it comes to watching the movie. So that's his strategy. He likes to really be sure to understand it really thoroughly. I think it's because afterwards we do a lot of discussion, and
yeah.
he always notices a lot of things. And
Okay,
I guess watching the dubbed version first must help, and then
yeah.
he feels better about.
I guess if
Um,
you take it this seriously, then yeah, it makes sense.
yeah, it makes
I'm just
sense, but
thinking
yeah.
like of a let's say typical English learner, right?
Hmm.
So I would say that not many people would want to do this because it doesn't sound that motivating, or
Hmm.
it might sound more like kind of hard work, right? You have to do a
Hmm.
lot of things in order to get to the finish line. I'm not sure, yeah,
Yeah.
but I understand it also comes down to some sort of individual needs. So
Yeah.
I guess the bottom
But
line is if this is how someone really improves, this is how if this is how it works for someone, then why
yeah.
not?
But I think
Yeah.
people have to know the reality of it before they go into it, because I would never say to anyone go into a movie cold. Like I give my students a lot of information about the movie so that they can kind of like, at the very least, watch the trailer beforehand or like read a little
Yeah.
summary of the story. Like, do not go in cold. Go in with just a little bit of information. And I think
Okay.
these are things that we do in our own
Yep.
language. Because if someone says to me, "Oh, do you want to go and see such and such a film at the cinema?" Like, if I don't know what it is, sometimes I might just trust the person enough to just go. But I would probably, like go watch the trailer, go read a little bit about it.
Re- Reviews and stuff
Um,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, try not to like read spoilers. Of course,
Of
this is
course. Yeah.
always a bit delicate. Same if somebody invites you to a concert, you might go on the Bandcamp of the group beforehand if you've never heard of them, just to check like, am I into this? Or
Yeah.
even if sometimes it's fun just to go without knowing. But yeah, but there's no sort of reward either without the effort. So I think like people want watching movies to be effortless, but I think it's one of the hardest things you can do when you're learning a language. So like, you can't have both. You can't have it be, uh,
Doesn't it also depend on the type of movie you watch? Because I can imagine, listen, I can
yeah.
imagine that an action movie
Mm.
where, let's say, most of the scenes are not really talking or there's
Oh
minimum
yeah, it's
that,
just
and then
noise.
you kind of get it because maybe if you are used to watching movies in your first language and if you are one of the movie people, then
Mm.
uh, you are able to sort of put two and two together and to deduce it or to figure it out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Mm.
Whereas when it comes to some more, I don't know what it would be, some more complex movies or movies that have a lot of dialogue in them. Uh,
Mm.
what kind of movie would they be? Like romantic comedies?
Well,
What do
we,
you think?
we actually we watch quite a lot of dramas in the
Okay.
movie club because we have watched like straight up comedies and romantic comedies, but we tend to get the most kind of mileage from dramas. And here I'm talking about the actual discussion part because
Yeah.
like comedies, okay, did you find it funny? Or
Yeah.
there's not that
Might be
much meat
stressful as
to
well, right?
discuss.
Might be there's this pressure of you have to understand the joke, you have to get it, otherwise you are missing
Yeah.
out. You're missing out. Whereas with dramas, it's more about emotions, I guess,
Yeah,
right?
they touch on
Yeah,
more like universal themes as well. I
exactly.
think
Yeah.
so. We end
Mhm.
up discussing, and some movies can be a good combination. Like last year, we watched My Girl, which is like an old movie with an old movie, like a movie from the 90s. We often watch movies from the 90s, to be honest,
Okay.
because like nowadays all movies are like action superhero movies. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. And yeah, that was an interesting movie because it is a comedy, but there are like some like there is tragedy in it as well. So you've got that combination, you've got the whole sort of spectrum of human emotions, which is really cool. And you get to see kind of like sort of America in the 1970s.
Mm.
And it's even though the film is from the 90s, it's set in the 1970s. So
Do you know
there's
what?
mm,
Yeah. So sorry.
lots of
As,
layers to it.
yeah. Well, as an English teacher who has always used board games in teaching,
Mm,
uh, throughout my career, I have kind of developed my own way of doing it, and I have also learned to understand what sort of games work the best. I mean,
Mm,
now I mean specific games, not only specific games, but also kind of genres or let's say types of games. So
right.
I assume it would be the same with you. So you say it's dramas. Dramas tend to be the best movies for
Yeah,
you.
for so there's different movies
Hmm.
that are good for different things. So dramas are good for generating discussion, but I would say comedies are often easier to understand. I mean that
Okay.
comedy is such a big category, but I mean, I think there's a reason why so many people learned watching Friends or, situation comedies like that,
Yeah.
because they just tend to be a bit easier. Although there are jokes, they want you to get the joke because they want it to be, they want an easy laugh, from
But
from these types of things. So yeah, also it depends what you want to do. But yeah, I would also avoid certain types of movie for English learning because, like
such
you
as
say, action movies, it's just
yeah.
explosions and noise and not a lot of dialogue. And then when people do speak, you've got someone like really inarticulate, like Vin Diesel, who's really hard to understand. So, I mean, for me, that's not a good use of your time. Like, it already takes a long time to watch a movie. I mean, you have to be really into it. So you may as well like watch a movie that's going to, um, expose you to the kind of language that you want to learn. That's also
Yeah.
an issue. I mean, you could argue that a movie from the 90s set in the 70s, well, maybe the language is slightly less useful, although I don't really think that makes a huge difference. So yeah, it's figuring out kind of what you need and what you want to do with it. Um, and I mean, if I wasn't doing the movie club, I'd probably just watch comedies all the time because I like
Mhm.
watching comedies.
Mhm.
But yeah, definitely for discussions, dramas
Yeah.
um, are better. Is what we've
Oh,
in 2 years
fair.
of
It's
doing
fair.
this, of watching and discussing movies, we've come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
So
So it's similar to me with the games. I have come to the conclusion that social deduction games are the best.
what are
Or,
social
or
deduction games?
social deduction games are, let's say, a subcategory of deduction games where you're
Like
trying to work.
Cluedo?
Cluedo is a deduction game, yes. So
Right.
you're
Okay.
trying to find out who'd done it. But social deduction games are those games where at the beginning of the game you have a secret role, and
Ah.
um, there are more people. Like everyone has a different role, and often you have two different teams, like the good guys and the bad guys. I'm really
Okay.
simplifying it now, but
Yeah.
the idea is that during the game you have to talk to each other in order to sort of find out who is who, or to find people you can trust, or to find the bad guys so that you can avoid them in the
Mm.
game or even kill them if it's like
Oh,
that.
right. Wow.
That
Okay. This
I
is
mean, not literally, but in the game, right?
okay. Yeah.
So
As part of the game. Wow. Okay.
basically, the main criteria for me are, yeah, when I play that game, yeah, or when my students play those games, are they going to use that language a lot? Are they going to use the
Mm.
target language a lot? Is that a good opportunity for them to practice using that language? Is that an authentic use? So I would say these are some similar things you have to think about when choosing
Yeah,
your
these are
films.
yeah, well, I think
Yep.
any material, and I mean, this is kind of what annoys me is like people do want to just be spoon fed, like tell me like what to watch or like give me all the words in English that I need or give me this, give me, and actually, unfortunately, okay, so we can give you things as a starting point, but then what's going to be more valuable for you is knowing how to select the right thing for yourself. So that it
Yeah.
always comes back to like what's always going to be more valuable for you in life is like learning to be more independent when you learn.
Yeah.
um Independent and also like interdependent, like for me it's really important to use your language with other people and to find people who like the same things as you and talk to them, but also being independent in that, instead of just like watching the series that everybody's talking about, like The Crown or something like that, which I've never watched. I don't care about the royal family. I do not want to watch hours and hours of series of them, like, enough. And I don't even know if the language would even be that useful. Like, it's going to be much better for you if you can just figure out kind of like, okay, what do I like that
Yeah.
motivates me to watch it? What do I need? Because like
Yeah.
it could be really useful for some people to watch a hospital drama. That could be a really easy way to learn a lot of medical English if you need it. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
um, and also what's your level. So like it's always trying to like juggle between kind of like, okay, this seems to be the thing that responds to these criteria the best. I mean, and again, there's knowing that there's no perfect material. So
Yeah, ultimately for me it comes down to you have to enjoy it, yeah, because
yeah,
the more you enjoy it, I mean it's a cliche, but the more you enjoy it, the more likely you are to keep going, the more likely you are
yeah,
to stay motivated, which is the key for me. And
yeah,
you mentioned The Crown. I have a student from Italy who
yeah.
is who is obsessed with the RP, and she for some reason likes posh people
Okay, but
um,
what the Queen
and
speaks.
she likes that TV show. She
Okay,
loves it, yeah. And then
well, good for her.
exactly. For someone like me, I can't stand Friends, for example, so I would never
Oh,
watch
good.
that.
Same here. I can't. I'm fed up
I
of Friends. Basically, had enough of
Well,
it.
I know a lot of people love it,
Yeah,
and
people
I know
still
that
love it
there
now.
are a
I
lot
don't.
of useful dialogues there as well. So for me, it's definitely like thrillers or spy movies or something like that, yeah, that might may have some dialogues in them too, not necessarily action movies where it's just all about shooting, but there are some intrigues, and I guess it's close to dramas as well. So that would be my
Yeah.
kind of thing. So what's your favorite genre then?
Well, that's this is why I don't necessarily like talk a lot about what I'm watching because I don't know if it's always like very useful because one of the we haven't been watching series so much recently. I find that like with my partner, we'll start watching a series and then the series will get cancelled. Like honestly, we've watched some really good stuff and it gets like cancelled after 2, 3, 4 seasons. We're like, why? This TV show was amazing and they
Hmm.
cancel it. Like, what's with that? And then people are still watching repeats of Friends. Well, obviously, if you cancel like good new stuff, then all that's left is like
Friends.
old episodes of Friends. Oh my god! So that happens to us. Or sometimes we start watching TV series and then we just kind of like we can't be bothered to
Friend.
watch the next season or whatever. But like, so a show that I've really enjoyed and I've watched really consistently is What We Do in the Shadows, which is such a silly program. It's like a mockumentary.
Okay.
So portmanteau word for talking about a TV series, a bit like sitcom, which is situation and comedy. Mockumentary is mock and documentary. So what we do in the shadows is a fake documentary about these vampires living in Staten Island,
Hmm.
close to New York. And so it's filmed in a documentary style. And it's just really silly. It's silly, but they have actually managed to do it where they've got kind of like some threads running through every season. So there is like there's character arcs for the people in the series because there's like these vampires and there's also vampires. I didn't know this. Vampires have a familiar. So your familiar is a human who like kind of looks after all your vampiric needs, like a sort of housekeeper, errand runner type person. And there's a very good character arc for the familiar in What We Do in the Shadows. And it's just very, very funny. And the accents are funny because the vampires are all like European originally. So one is British, one is supposed to be from Greece, and
Hmm.
one is from, well, and they're all very old. So one is from a place which is now modern day Iran, but in his time it wasn't called Iran. But anyway, so there's some really funny accents. It's just really silly. And it's interesting because there's a kind of like culture shock element because, even if they've lived in the USA for hundreds of years as vampires, they still don't understand American culture and they don't really understand modern life
Hmm.
because, they're hundreds of years old. And that's just really silly and funny, but I can understand that like for a lot of people that it wouldn't be. And then
Hmm.
another thing I was watching a lot during the pandemic was Ridiculousness. So we watched the French version. Well, it's like dubbed into French. And it's a really annoying dubbing where like they leave the English. You can still like hear the English and then they dub it in French on
I
top.
can't,
It's
oh
so
my god.
weird. I don't know why MTV is like this. All the programs are dubbed into French. And I was like, I thought this was like a channel for like young people, but
That's
who you'd think would, you know, want to
hmm.
listen in English. But and that's just that's literally just compilations of videos from the internet of people hurting themselves. And I mean, it's just really silly.
So
It's
you
funny.
so let me ask you some quick fire questions. So are you
Yeah.
against dubbing? Are you against dubbing when it comes to language learning then?
Not really. I think it can have its place, and I think it's creative how my student uses it, and I think there's definitely a place for it, just knowing how to, work with it appropriately.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Then I want to ask you, what's better, TV shows or films for learning English? Like, what would you actually, where do you stand on that
Yeah,
debate?
probably TV series for many reasons, for the length and for the getting into a rhythm with watching them. Because if you find one that you really like, you'll keep coming back to it. So they're a lot easier than movies in many, many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think about how I could use TV series rather than movies. The reason I use movies in my movie club is that we spend a whole month on one movie, so we really go in really deep on the movie. So in that sense, you get to the end of the month and you understand it really, really well. It's still not perfectly, but you understand it a lot better than when you started. So I actually like that the going deep on one thing. Whereas if you were to do a kind of club with TV series, it'd be very like, every week, trying to keep up, like busy, busy, busy. You can't really go in depth in each episode. But then again, you probably don't need to, and it's different in a TV series.
But let's say if you're an independent learner, I guess TV shows are better. I would actually tend to agree with that.
Yeah.
Because I like the fact that you can kind of you have more time to sort of get to know the characters. There is a character development, whereas with the movies it's like too quick.
Yeah,
And
then it's
also
over by the time you've
it's over.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can like explore more in TV shows. And I like even me as a what do you call it, like the guy that like user, right? Just
user of what?
just as me, as Zdenek. If I don't think of myself as a language learner, what's the word for it? As me, as just someone who,
you're right. Yeah, just look at you. It's like
consumer.
No, a producer. Yeah, a user of the language. Yes.
User of the language, someone who just watches films or TV shows. I just prefer TV shows. It's closer to my heart. I don't know why, but it's just the way it is. Okay, so what about subtitles? So basically, I'm now interested in your view, because I guess it's divided. Like, teachers say different things. So I wonder, like, what's your take on subtitles, English subtitles and subtitles in your own native language as well?
Yeah, I don't know why it's divided, because like it's like anything, it's just a tool. Like all of these things, it's a tool. You just don't have to know how to use it. A bit like dubbing, which you could choose not to use at all, but if you use it in a sort of strategic way, it could be quite clever. So like subtitles, just exactly the same thing. It's a tool that you need to learn to use. For me, improving your listening skills, a thing that really helps is having some kind of text to check your work, essentially. So like that can be tricky with podcasts. Not every podcast comes with a transcript because they're expensive to produce, and they, whereas at least with movies, you've got an instant transcript in the form of the subtitles. So that means you can check what you've listened to. So subtitles are good in that sense. Any form of written transcription of what you're listening to is going to be essential for you in language learning.
So you say this, like, I agree, it can be beneficial, but I can also see the opposite point. Like, I can play the devil's advocate. So if I think about this, like using a transcript or even like reading out the subtitles, it doesn't seem like a natural thing for me to do. It doesn't reflect the real life. Yeah. So it's not, so that would be my like counter argument.
I mean, I suppose again, it depends what you do with it. Because I mean, I don't know. People argue sort of slightly. Yeah, I suppose. But does everything you have to do in language learning have to be natural?
That's a good question. Yeah, because you have people who like course books, textbooks, and that's completely unnatural. And then there are people who like to, I guess, learn with me. I prefer teaching through, let's say, communication or through just dialogues, and doing it in an authentic way. But I'm not saying one is better than the other.
Yeah, there's different. Because even when we say natural, like when you were a baby and a kid, you're learning your first language, people were not talking to you naturally. They were modifying their language. Where you had storybooks and books you were reading, your first books you were reading at school, they're not fun books to read. John has a ball. John kicked the ball. I mean, they're boring, but we have to read them, and we have to do things at school like write stuff out. We have to practice handwriting and practice our motor skills, and reading and writing is a little bit less natural. But this is also the thing: if you're an adult learning, I'm assuming you're literate. I mean, not everybody is, but I mean, assuming
I
you're
hope so.
literate, I hope so.
I'm not always sure, but I hope so. Yes.
Assuming you're literate, it gives you this advantage is that you can use like two modalities. You can even use two modalities at the same time. But again, I mean, I hate to be very relativistic about it, but I think you can argue that everything works.
Yeah.
And in whatever dose combination or whatever that you want, and it really does depend to a certain extent on you. But
And then you have enough. Yeah. No,
and
this is. I like to talk about this because then you have also some people, and I'm sometimes like this. You who sort of believe that certain things work better than the others because maybe you have some research behind it. There's evidence for
true,
it.
yeah.
It's academic. Yeah. So that as well. For example, translation, is it good really for you when learning English? Is it good to use one language to have subtitles in a different language than the original? Is that a good thing for you? So you might
So
have some.
yeah, well, it's funny actually. So someone asked because I was kind of like, subtitling. We can use it. We can use it for part of watching a movie or TV. You can sort of turn it on and off and play with it, and certainly use it to check your work. And it has all these advantages. And I've always thought, yeah, you probably shouldn't start mixing up, audio input in one language and then written language in
I
your
don't
language.
think you
I mean,
should. It's my
yeah.
belief as a teacher.
However,
Yep.
did you know that, for example, in Japan, so I was on a podcast earlier this year with somebody who has a lot of familiarity with teaching in Japan, and who said that that's the normal scenario for Japanese people. The audio is in English and then the subtitles are in like the Japanese script, because they don't have a tradition of dubbing, like in France and Italy, there's a lot of, so
Yep.
actually some people have always, used this combination of
I know, but is that the right way to do it? Is that the most effective way to learn the language? Now, let's be honest. I know this is we are on thin ice here. We're on a dangerous ground. But take a typical Japanese learner and look at someone from Sweden. In Sweden, they don't have any dubbing. Yeah, in Norway, they don't have any dubbing. Everything is in original from their childhood. And then Japanese, they have to watch it in Japanese in original Japanese and with English subtitles, and then compare where these two learners get, how far they get in their language proficiency, how likely they are to achieve.
I mean, it can't all be
how fast they learn. I know we shouldn't like generalize. I know that. Yeah, but at the same time, I've got enough evidence supporting this from my teaching career that I would actually argue that that's not the right way to do it, Japanese people.
Yeah, but I mean, they don't have much of a, they don't have much. They're working with what they have, and I think a big part of learning language is being resourceful and
you're right.
working with what the constraints that you have, and doing the best you can with them. But yeah, obviously the Scandinavian countries are in a particular. There's more to it than just the TV, obviously.
But that's a big part of it, and it's not just them. It's like Denmark and Netherlands and all these countries,
Yeah, that tend to have a good level of English. I think there must be multiple factors, but yeah, if I had to choose, I would go for audio in the same language and subtitles in the same language. I think that makes it easier. Just the danger is that sometimes people get stuck in this situation where they're sort of reading the subtitles all the time, when they're watching a movie or a TV series. I think there's also the danger that you end up doing that all the time. So I think you have to be careful. You also have to know what you're doing. So if you're watching the movie because you really want to make sure you understand the whole plot, like maybe it could be interesting to watch initially with the subtitles and be like, okay, I want to get everything. I want to really not miss a thing. And then watch it maybe a second time to actually more kind of appreciate like the visuals and the kind of ambiance of the movie, and not, not have everything kind of spoon-fed to you, if you
Yeah.
like, in the subtitles. So I think, again, it depends what you want to do. Some people really like having the subtitles on all the time because they want to like write down every expression they come across, and it's sort of like a vocabulary tool for them.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think, again, it really depends like what you're trying to do, basically.
You're right, but that it's necessary to point out that when you watch movies and you read the subtitles, and you have subtitles on, because it's an easier skill,
Yeah.
easier for your brain. They told me this at my Delta course. Yeah. So when you do that, you're not practicing listening.
Yeah,
Even if
you just
even if the audio is on, your brain is focusing on the reading.
on the reading.
So you should keep that in mind. Like, not you, Cara.
Yeah.
I'm talking to English learners. Yeah,
Yeah.
English learners. If you have subtitles on, I'm not saying it's bad. Like, as long as it's in the target language, that's my view. Just bear in mind that you are practicing reading, not listening so
Yeah.
much. Not
And
so
like,
much.
and people have written to me saying like, I understand every word on these subtitles, but like I can't catch the word without So sometimes it can actually end up being a problem for people,
A trap.
a
Yeah.
trap that they get into and then they sort of can't get out of, and then that makes other things difficult because obviously in life you don't have subtitles everywhere
No.
all the time for good
Exactly.
so it can actually make your life difficult. But like a super simple tip I got from a friend to do with that. She works a lot with TV series and movies for teaching Italian. And it was just to like, okay, so you're going to need the subtitles sometimes, like it can be a bit hard without them. So she's just kind of like, we'll just use them like some of the time. And I think that's such a good answer to this question, because sometimes it gets very binary, like either you use them all the time or you never use them, which is
Yeah.
not really a helpful answer, because like there's times where you do need them, or you really want to
Mhm.
check some new expression and you need to switch, like there are moments where it is necessary. But just in your movie watching, instead of sort of like, oh, I'm going to have them on all the time, just like maybe have them on for 5 minutes, turn them off for 5 minutes.
Yep.
Or if a scene is really difficult, you could have them on for that scene, then you turn them off for a bit, knowing that kind of like, in the moments where they're off, your brain is going to figure out what's going
Exactly.
on, because you'll be paying attention to other things. You'll be paying
Yeah.
attention to the scenery and the body language and people's gestures and lip movements. And
Yeah.
I think that's a
Yeah.
good way
Because
to
absolutely. Because I don't know if your brain is like, if your brain is designed in that way that you can process like two different skills at the same time. Like, I'm not
yeah
sure. Like, it's is that a natural thing to do? That's why I kind of like podcasts, because like there you don't really have a choice. Like, you just, or even YouTube videos like these, right?
mm,
You have the um, you can have gestures, I guess. Body language helps you.
yeah,
And
but it's mostly just two talking heads, so I don't
yeah,
but then that has its disadvantages. I mean, because then you will miss a lot unless you were to come back and like have a look at certain bits with the transcript. And
yeah, yeah. Depends on your
so
level, of course, right? If your
yeah,
level if your level is high enough, like if you're at least B2,
mm.
even if you miss something, you should be able to kind of figure it out.
Probably because you've got enough language that yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're building on what you know, and you know a lot. So, yeah, that definitely makes it easier.
Ex-
I feel more for our B1 people. That's a difficult stage
yeah.
to be at,
Yeah.
because you know quite a lot already, but some stuff is still just too hard. But the beginner stuff is too
Yeah.
easy, and yeah, that's a
Yeah, I know what you mean.
strange. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a difficult place to be in. So, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool, Cara. So I think that's where we will leave it for tonight. But it's been a great debate with you. You are a true
Mm,
professional, and you understand this field, and that's why that's exactly what I was looking forward to. So,
yeah.
Cara, good luck with your business. Thank you very much for your participation today. And once again, you guys, listeners, can find Cara at Leo dash listening.com.
Yeah.
All right.
Come. All right. Thanks, Zdenek. That was
Take care,
awesome.
Cara.
I'm gonna go and eat something. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.